being very, very harsh with Manchester United. I'm only going to give them a D.
Remember, guys, to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Really appreciate it. Really helps out the channel. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 7 of the Erad Football Podcast. My name is Iconic, joined as always by my man Jakey.
What's going on, guys?
And today's episode is something a bit different to what we usually do. We will be rating every Premier League team's transfer window, ranging from A+ to the dreaded F.
Yeah, it's going to be a good thing to dissect. Going to be a lot of controversial takes.
Absolutely. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it.
Yep, we shall start with AFC Bournemouth. Do you want to start this one off, or?
Yeah, I'll start this one off. So, in terms of ratings, I have given Bournemouth a D. I don't think they've had the best transfer window for a team that's just come up from the Championship. I don't think they've bought nearly enough. Not saying that they need to buy a crazy amount of players like some teams when they come up to the Premier League, but I think they had serious areas that they needed to improve coming into the Premier League, and they just haven't done so. They've obviously got Ryan Fredericks on a free from West Ham when he was released. He's a good young player that has potential, but has not really cut it. You had Tavernier from Middlesbrough, half decent signing, but not really done anything. He's obviously a Championship player. Neto from Barcelona, barely really played. Senese from Feyenoord, Jack Stevens from Southampton. I mean, they're all okay signings, but for me, they're just Championship level signings. They haven't really signed anyone that's going to propel them for me to keep them in the Premier League. In terms of their transfer window as such, I think they've done decent business in terms of their finances. Obviously, Bournemouth is a small club, so they're going to not have the huge war chest that some clubs have. So I think they will have found themselves quite happy in terms of the finances of their window. But in terms of Premier League survival, I think they're in big trouble.
Yeah, I agree. I've given them a bit harsher of a rating. I've given them an E. I think, coming into this league, there was obviously going to be a massive jump up in quality. I think the signings of Tavernier and Senesi are quite good signings, but like you said, Tavernier is a Championship level midfielder, and Senesi's coming from a league that's very hard to prove yourself with this jump with the players around you. I think Neto can prove quite good quality, especially on a financial aspect on a free. But Scott Parker needed to be backed, and I don't think he has this window, and ultimately that's what he called out, and it's what cost him his job. Yeah, I think. Yeah. I don't think they've signed well enough. I can with them players, I can see them struggling.
Absolutely, I think it's going to be a struggled season for Bournemouth, and they'll do well to stay in the Premier League.
Yeah, I agree. But we'll move on to Arsenal. Not many signings for Arsenal, but they targeted a lot of areas that needed to be targeted. I've given them an A. I think, while spending shrewdly, they've spent where they needed to. They needed a new left back, whether it be for cover for Tini or just an out-and-out full back that they needed. I think Zinchenko was a brilliant signing. Gabriel Jesus was always going to be a hit at the Gunners. He was a player, they needed a number 9, and they've got now a number 9. And I think the signing of Fabio Vieira, while not playing a lot, if he can be anything like the other Vieira that they had at the club once upon a time, it'll be a very popular outfit at the Emirates.
Yeah, absolutely. I've given them an A-, simply because although, like you stated, that the signings they have made are great, and obviously everyone knew where Arsenal needed to strengthen, and Arteta did that. There was some very good deals made, and they were made early as well. They obviously had an agreement with City. They got the players they wanted in. They strengthened in the areas that they needed strengthening. But for me, when it came down to their transfer policy, the first half of the window was fantastic. Arsenal. The second half for me was just a bit too many question marks. Like they at one point they wanted Fofana, it didn't happen. They wanted Tielemans. Now this is the big one for me. Tielemans. Leicester said they wanted £25 million for him, which is for me is a good price for Yuri Tielemans. Is a very good established player. Arsenal said no, they're not going to pay for that. Then on transfer deadline day, Arsenal decided they wanted to go for Diego Carlos and offered Aston Villa £25 million, which they obviously rejected.
Just to
Now,
correct you there, do you mean Douglas Luiz?
who did I say?
Diego Carlos.
Oh God.
That's Aston Villa's centre back.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well.
But yeah, so they obviously lost my train of thought now.
They didn't get.
Yeah, so they didn't get
Luiz.
Douglas Luiz, and obviously, like I said, Yuri Tielemans was that £25 million that they could have paid Leicester for. So it was a very good window for Arsenal fans. Don't get me wrong, but for me, they could have done a little bit more. They were obviously, I get as a club, you're obviously trying to get the best players in that you can for the least amount of money. You don't want to be spending crazy amounts of money on these players and crazy wages. So I think the deals they have done is good. I just think it could have been a little bit better. That's why I've only given them an A-.
I think I just want to add as well, the only reason they've gotten the A for me instead of the A- is they got a lot of players off the books that needed to be getting to be got off the books. Like they released Lacazette, which I thought was massive for them. I thought he was like a tumour at the club. He was quite like a Aubameyang before Aubameyang left. He was lazy, lethargic. He didn't try, and I think getting him off the books alongside the likes of Lucas Torreira, Matteo Guendouzi, Nicolas Pepe's out on loan. They let go of Bellerin. They got rid of a lot of deadwood players that they needed to get rid of. And I think that's the only reason. Like, if them players don't leave and they're still at the club, that's probably an A- for me. But I think they shipped off the players that needed to go that had run their course at the club.
No, I agree.
But yeah, so that's our ratings for Arsenal. We'll move on to the Villa. I'll let you start for this one.
Okay, so for Aston Villa, I've given them a C. I don't think it's been a good window whatsoever for Villa fans. I think they've brought in some half decent players, but I think after they made a big money signing in Diego Carlos, going to get his name right this time, and obviously then he ends up getting injured, which is just a huge blow. When you've spent that amount of money for a player that is your like key signing, and then he gets injured, season starts, then you're panicking as a club, and that's exactly what Villa did. They obviously ended up getting then Donker and Bednarek as on deadline day, which good signings, but I mean there's a reason these teams are letting them go. For me, there wasn't really a standout. And I mean, they have the players already at the club. So in terms of where they was last season, they didn't need to crazily strengthen. And obviously they didn't have the players to exactly sell, bring in huge money to be able to do that. I mean, I don't really know what they've done with the £100 million that they got for Jack Grealish. It doesn't look like they've really done much of it. It seems like a Tottenham thing where they when they sold Bale, and rather than bringing in one or two great players to replace them, they bought 7 or 8 mediocre players, which is all well and good. But for me, Villa's transfer window just wasn't it. I think Villa fans will be very upset with their window, and I think Steven Gerrard could struggle by if he was backed or not, but I don't think it was a very good window whatsoever for Aston Villa.
I've been a little more generous with Villa. I've given them a B simply for the signing of Diego Carlos. Yes, it's unfortunate that he's got injured, but when he does come back, he's going to be a massive player for them. And I also think if they can get Boubacar Kamara playing, he is a right talent. That the little French defensive midfielder they bought, he had an absolutely blinding season with Marseille, getting them to as far as they did in the Europa League, and
Yeah,
everyone knows the ability Felipe Coutinho has, and that for 20 million, I think is quite a sensible sign, and they just need to get him playing like we know he can. Like this league knows how good he is. I think the signing of Jan Bednarek kind of gives a bit more comfort to that defence because they now don't have to partner Conser and Mings together, which I think is an absolutely awful partnership. And Dendoncker in midfield just gives a bit more depth. He's a hard worker. He was well thought of at Wolves not long ago, but fell out of favour, and he's now got the chance to play first team football again, which I can only imagine will be good for him.
yeah,
So yeah, I gave them a B for being a bit more generous,
sounds good.
as
So
well
we'll,
as also getting rid of a few deadwood players.
yeah.
But we'll
So we'll move on.
move on to Brentford. Um, I've given them a C. Now I might be ill-guided on that. I do think they've signed well. While he's not played much, I know that Mikkel Damsgaard is a quality player, and we've seen it in the Euros.
Mhm.
I think the signing of Thomas Strakosha is a financially very good signing. Ben Mee from Burnley, as much as they got relegated, I do think he was the better out of their defence. Aaron Hickey from Bologna, he was well thought of in Italy. The young Scot, and he's got the potential to be a very, very good player. But yeah, it was a weird window for Brentford. I think they've strengthened in areas that they needed to strengthen while already being a good team.
Yeah, I gave them a C plus for this one, and the reason I gave that is it sounds a bit harsh, but although Brentford have made some okay signings, wasn't really anything that like caught my eye. I think the biggest one for me was actually Keane Lewis Potter from Hull. This kid lit it up in the Championship, and he reminds me a bit of a Jared Bowen, who retrospectively also came from Hull. Um, but this kid he looks ambitious, he looks enthusiastic, looks like he just needs mentoring, and I think Brentford is the perfect place for him to do that. And obviously, Brentford had a very amazing breakout season last year that shocked a lot of people. They just, as we spoke about many times before, they just horrible to play against and hard to beat. They're gonna give you 110%. So in terms of like their transfer window, I think they probably looked at it and gone, well, we don't actually need that much. We're just gonna try and bring in a few players to strengthen the areas that we might be a bit weaker on. We've probably done. And in
Yeah,
terms of the money they've spent, they haven't actually spent that much. So it's great financial business from Brentford, as you would expect them to do so. They didn't lose any big hitters that people could have come for. The biggest one would have been Christian Eriksen, but he was only on. He only came on a free because of his obviously heart condition, and then Man United come calling. Um, they didn't lose any of their big hitters, such as Ivan Toney or Mo, who obviously had great seasons last year, which could have been a big worry for Brentford fans coming into this transfer window. So they kept hold of the players they needed to, and they brought in well. But just for me, in terms of the overall of how I balance a transfer window, um, I've given them a C plus. Not terrible. I'd say like mid pack window
yeah.
for sure.
We'll move on to Brighton, and a weird one for Brighton. I don't think they've signed well at all, personally. I think the signing of Billy Gilmore pause as well, and Levi Colwill will be a good loan signing. So I've given them a D. I don't think they've signed particularly well, and losing Cucurella will be a big hit for them.
Yeah, see, I've given them a C. Um, I'm around the same idea as you, but at the same time, they're also in that Brentford mark for me, where I think, obviously, before Potter decided to make the change, he was building something at Brighton, and he knew he already had the team there. He just needed to get them going. But as I said, the way most people balance a transfer window is the players you bring in, not the players you keep. Obviously, it's fantastic to keep players, especially if they're big players. Like, for example, Brighton have some good talent in their ranks, but did they sign well enough to be able to really challenge? Because obviously Brighton's next hope would be to try and get into those European spots. And I always think after you've had a good season, you need to improve. That season before is just pointless in a way.
Yeah.
And for me, Brighton just didn't do enough for me in this transfer window that they could have done. I think again though, like Brentford, they were financially shrewd about it. They
Yeah.
didn't want to overdo it because you've seen it before where a team's had a great season and they thought, right, this is the season we're going to spend lots of money and really challenge because we can do it with not as good players. So if we get much better players, then it'll work. But sometimes it doesn't work out like that and you end up losing hundreds of millions of pounds.
Mm.
So I think the way Brighton did it was correct in terms of what they're trying to build, which was under obviously Graham Potter. But for me, just the whole as a transfer window, not enough.
Yeah. I think as well. I certainly think they've lost better than what they've brought back in. Losing Basuma and Cucurella were two massive players for them, and I don't think Gilmore and Estupinan bring that same level of quality that Basuma and Cucurella did.
Mm.
But we'll move on to to Chelsea.
Yes. So this one for me, it was actually a very good window for Chelsea. I give it a B plus. I think they've signed very well. They signed in positions they knew needed strengthening. For me, two of their top signings, Sterling and Koulibaly. I think Koulibaly's an absolute animal. I think it will take him a little bit of time to just get used to the Premier League. But once he does, I think he'll be an absolute superstar. It was unfortunate that they had to obviously lose Rudiger on a free to be able to sign, or obviously have to sign Koulibaly. I think Rudiger's an amazing defender. I think that's a big loss for Chelsea, regardless of who you're bringing in.
Mm.
I think the signing of Raheem Sterling is fantastic. This is a guy that's been very underrated pretty much his whole career. He's never been that absolute standout player, but you know what you're going to get with Raheem. They obviously brought in Cucurella for Fana, and then on deadline day they brought in Aubameyang and Zakaria. Now, for me, it was a good window for Chelsea. They brought in the players they needed to do. The only reason I don't give them a higher rating is because there are just so many question marks in those signings. You've got Aubameyang that's come in. He obviously was great at Arsenal, then struggled, then fell out with the manager, then left to Barca. Didn't really do that much at Barcelona and is now back in the Premier League at Chelsea. It seemed like it was a bit of a panic buy on deadline day, but at the same time, it was a position they knew they needed as a number 9. He obviously was excited to play under Thomas Tuchel, and now Thomas Tuchel's left, so God knows how that's going to play out. Fofana was the player Chelsea was after for the entire window, and they did end up getting their man. So hopefully he's going to fit in well. I think it all depends on what Potter wants to do for me, whether or not he wants to play the 5 at the back, because it seemed like these were all Tuchel signings. So it's going to be weird for Potter. He's got to now deal with Tuchel signings until January, and there's going to be some of them that probably don't make the cut for him.
Mm.
And obviously he's now reunited with Cucurella, so
See how that works. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting.
I very much have done the same. I've given them a B. I think an underrated player that'll go that'll be a big miss for them, and not many people will agree. But I think Timo Werner will be a huge miss for them, and they've lost that, and they lost it for half of the price of what they bought him for, which I think is tragic. The signing of Zakaria on loan poses a brilliant idea. You get to test him, and then if you want him at the end of it, you can try and sign him. Fofana, I think, is a little overpriced. He was always going to cost a lot, but he's now up there in the bracket of the most expensive centre backs in the league.
Yeah,
which will hang over his head. Korea is an interesting signing. They've still got Chilwell, so it'll be interesting to see how they chop and change. Koulibaly is a Rolls Royce of a defender. I think he's just still in his bedding in phase. It'll be a very good player for them. And Sterling, like you say, another one that goes under the radar for most clubs. But I think while bringing in great players, I think they've also equally lost good players. Obviously Rudiger on a free was always going to be a big miss. Marcus Alonso, who was always a good backup that you could rely on, he's now gone. Timo Werner, like I alluded to, he's gone, and I think he'll be a much bigger miss than Chelsea fans will let on.
Yeah.
So that I can only give them a B for this window.
Okay. Well, moving swiftly on.
Crystal Palace.
So I've given them a D for this one. For me, I don't think Crystal Palace have strengthened very well at all in terms of win. I think it's been close to terrible in terms of what they could have done, what they should have done, and what they haven't done. I think Patrick Vieira is building something very special at Crystal Palace. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a fantastic manager and he's got great players around him. I think the only good thing about their window is they didn't lose any of the big hitters. Like I've said, like they didn't lose the Zahas. They did obviously lose Conor Gallagher, which I think could be a big loss for them because he was a very good player for them last season. But I think they have the stability around them to be okay. They'll be fine until January. Hopefully they'll do a bit more in January. But I don't see them in a relegation battle, but I don't think their transfer window is anything near where they need to challenge in Europe, which with a few signings they could have done for me. But for me, just not a good transfer window for Crystal Palace.
Yeah, I very much agree. However, I've been a little bit more harsh with Palace. I've given them an E. I think the quality of the players that they've signed are atrocious. I think the only really big standout player is Chris Richards from Bayern Munich. He was quite a highly thought of youngster. Obviously, it's very hard to break into Bayern as a youngster. Not many people can. I think the signing of Sam Johnson poses good. He was very good for West Brom last season before they went down. And I think they've replaced Kiyate well with Cheik Decore. But again, I think it's more of a season where they've lost more talent than they've brought. I think, but yes. However, they did get rid of a lot of deadwood. They got rid of Martin Kelly. They got rid of Christian Benteke. They've got a lot of players off the books that will open up that wage budget for future signings.
Absolutely.
But we'll move on to the Toffees. Move over to the blue side of Merseyside and Everton, and I've given them an F. I've been very, very harsh with Everton, and that's not bad. Putting bias aside, I think the signings they have made are championship level signings. I didn't rate Dwight McNeil at Burnley. Connor Cody obviously was out of favour at Wolves. James Tarkowski got relegated with Burnley. And Neil Maupay is an absolutely abysmal striker, in my opinion. I just think they've not really strengthened at all, considering the relegation battle they were in towards the end of the season.
So I've given them a D-. I think they have, like you say, they have had a bad transfer window, but not as bad as you've obviously ranked them. I think that Connor Cody is actually a good signing for them. This guy is a leader. He's someone that's not going to give up. Same with Tarkovsky as well. I think these are two very good signings for Everton. For me, their weakest positions was at the back, and I think they've strengthened that well, personally. I think Cody and Tarkovsky will be a very good pairing, and they will usher that defence, because there's a lot of youth around that Everton team at the minute, and they're going to make it so that these younger players are going to feel a lot more safe at the back, and they're going to be respected instantly. I think the Onana signing's a good one, probably their standout signing of the window. They wanted him for a while. They've eventually got. But in terms of, like you say, I mean, they brought back Idrissa Gana Gay. I mean, it didn't work out the first time. I don't know why they time, but remains to be seen. But for me, they're just not enough for me, Everton. I think they're going to be in big trouble this year. I think they're going to have to really rely on players like Anthony Gordon.
Hello.
They
My game's cutting out, I think.
I don't know what's happened there. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they're gonna have to really rely on players like Anthony Gordon. They're gonna have to get Calvert-Lewin back fit ASAP if they're gonna want to even avoid relegation. For me,
Yeah.
so for me, yeah, a poor transfer window for sure for Everton.
Yeah. We'll move on to another London club. We'll move on to Fulham. I think it was an interesting window for Fulham, personally. I think they've signed quite well for a newly promoted team. I've given them a C. I think, Willian is an interesting one, but I think the signings of like Manus Solomon from Shakhtar, Bernd Leno from Arsenal, I think is a brilliant signing. And Babu from Wolves didn't really cut it with Newcastle when he was in the Prem the first time, but he's aged, he's matured. I think their standout signing this year is João Palhinha. I think he's an incredible CDM.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they've had a very half decent transfer window for newly promoted club. I've given them a B. Like you say, they've made some very good signings. For me, it all comes down to when you're a newly promoted club and you bring in a lot of players, it's just all about your manager then. It's about, has he brought in the right players? Can he get them to gel quickly? Because in the Premier League, things come quick and fast, and before you know it, you're in a relegation battle. If you can't find your strongest 11 quickly and you can't pick up points in the Premier League, you can find yourself in trouble quickly. And as a newly promoted manager, that's when you start sweating. But in terms of the transfer window itself, I think they've bought very well. Like you say, Paulinho is a big one. I think Kazawa on loan from PSG is a good signing. Willian, does he still have it? Remains to be seen. I think Dan James on loan is a great signing. You know what you're going to get from Dan James. And Babu is another one as well. So that's why I've given them a B. I think in terms of the players they've signed, I think personally from the get-go I said Fulham would survive in the league, and it all came down to Alexander Mitrovic. I think with the players they've signed, it's less on Mitrovic now, but it still will come down to a lot of Mitrovic goals in the Premier League. But I do think they'll be fine, and I like Fulham's transfer window. If I was a Fulham fan, I'd be very happy with this window.
Yeah, I think as well it gives more support to Mitrovic rather than it being a one-man show.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we'll go on to Leeds. An interesting window for Leeds, very much.
Yes, I've given them a B for this one as well. I think a good window. At first, I looked at it and I thought, oh God, what are these signings? The players you've barely heard of before. If you played FIFA, you might have seen them in a pack, do you know what I mean? Or heard them now and again. But for a lot of people, these were unknown signings for Leeds United. But the manager has an idea of how he wants to play, and he knew the players he wanted to bring in that would understand that way of thinking. And when I look at it as a whole, I do good window for Leeds United. They obviously got a lovely payout in Calvin Phillips, which, yes, it's a big loss for Leeds United. but you've sold him to sit on the bench for City, and you're going to prosper with that money. For me, I think it's good business from Leeds United, and I like the Sinistera signing from Feyenoord. He looks like he's going to be a very good player. The two Salzburg boys, Aronson and Christensen, they're just going to run for days. And they obviously have some very good young players as well that are coming through Leeds United. I like the building process right now at Leeds United. They struggled last year. I think in my predictions I had them struggling again. Now I'm thinking maybe not so because of the window they've had.
Yeah, I've given them a C minus, simply for there'll be question marks around the likes of Mark Rocker, Tyler Adams, and Sinistera to kind of fill the void that they've lost with Rafinha and Calvin Phillips.
Yep.
I think the signings of Aronson and Christensen from Salzburg obviously played under Jesse March. I think the signings that make sense on a financial aspect, and as players that the manager knows will run and do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to touch on. So you say about Calvin Phillips and Rafinha. Last season, when Leeds United were struggling, it seemed like Rafinha or Calvin Phillips had to play. Now it seems like Leeds United have a whole team. It's not just one player they're relying on. That's the biggest thing for me. I've never been a big fan of a one-man club that you just need to rely on.
Yeah.
Never been a fan of that personally.
I also think the signing of the youngster from Zurich is going to be quite a good signing for them in years to come. Most football managers will know who he is, that Wilfred Gnonto, or Gnonto, if that's how you pronounce it. Another gem on Football Manager gone. I also think that they've sold quite well in the players that they needed to get out of the club.
Yeah.
Tyler Roberts out on loan. You've got Helder Costa finally off the books. Well, I thought he was out off the books permanently. He's out on loan. But
yeah, but we'll move on.
Yeah, we'll move on. Leicester City.
Yes, this one I think people can probably guess where our rankings is going, but it is the dreaded F for me for Leicester City. I mean, there isn't too much to talk about this. We've said it all before. I mean, to start off with, you lose your captain and your most influential player in Kasper Schmeichel that no one saw coming. Then you're waiting to see them replace it, and they just don't. And Leicester fans are waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and it gets to deadline day, and Leicester City have still not made a signing. At the start of deadline day, Leicester City have not made a signing, and then on deadline day, they sign Wout Faes from Reims, which is just a panic buy. Simple as. It's obviously not someone they were looking at, because as a club, Leicester are looking at players, and all they've really done in this transfer window is try to keep hold of everyone. They obviously lose Fofana. They could have easily lost Tielemans. They could have lost Maddison. If the clubs would have paid just a little bit more, they would have lost these players. It's that simple for me. Leicester City are in big, big trouble right now. Brendan Rodgers is in big trouble, and he's come out and said it. He was not backed. I don't know what is happening right now at Leicester City Football Club, but they are just in freefall right now.
Yeah.
After the amazing years they've had in the Premier League, winning the Premier League, winning the FA Cup, some of the greatest moments in the football club's history, and right now it's just all being tarnished. And it's just upsetting. It really is very upsetting. Because as a football fan, I love seeing Leicester City in the Premier League, and I think this could be the last year we do, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I've also given them the F rating. It's weird because how long into deadline day did they lose Fofana? It was towards the start, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was early.
So they've had all day of deadline day to put that 75 million to use, and they just haven't.
Yeah, well, they left it too late. If they wanted to sell Fofana, and if they knew Fofana was unhappy and wanted to go to Chelsea, which they did a couple of weeks before the deadline, they should have just let him go. Then you have 2 weeks to work on how you're going to spend that money and have a plan. But they just seem that they have no plan whatsoever.
Yeah.
None. It just seemed like they wanted to make money this window without spending it. Simple as.
I think it's going to be worrying times for Leicester City, and like you said, this could be the last time we see them in the Premier League if they don't pull the finger out.
I hope not, but it's looking rough.
Yeah, it is. But we move on to the red side of Merseyside now, and we move on to my boys Liverpool. A frustrating window for Liverpool. I think losing the likes of Mane, we lost Origi on a free, who was always quite a clutch player for us. Losing Nico Williams, that's a backup for Trent, and the players we brought in, like yes, Fabio Cavallo is going to prove to be a hit at the club. Calvin Ramsey's injured, but he had a cracker of a season for Aberdeen before moving, and Darwin Núñez early on in the window for the 65 million. At face value looks good, but when you realise how made of glass our team is,
I haven't given him a rating yet.
I was going to get onto the rating.
I'll go on.
Yeah, at face value, it seems like a good window, but I can only rate it at a D for the simple fact is we left it as late as we did to sign Arthur. And there's going to be question marks around him, considering he couldn't get into such an awful Juventus team. But I do think he'll do well. It's just not been a great window.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I've actually given him a bit worse, possibly one of the biggest controversial takes from my side personally. I've given them an E. I don't think it's been a good window whatsoever for Liverpool. I think they have a few positions that they needed to strengthen and they didn't do so. For me, personally, I don't think Darwin Núñez is going to be a fantastic player for Liverpool. If you're looking at it face value and what in Sadio Mane, Núñez does not come even close to that for me. I think he's a good player and I think he has potential, but for me, I don't see him reaching the realms of the Mane, the Salah. Even Firmino, I think, is a better player than Darwin Núñez, personally. Because I think Firmino gives you more on the pitch than Darwin Núñez does. If Darwin Núñez isn't putting the ball in the back of the net, what else? In my eyes,
Yeah.
I think in the midfield you knew you needed to strengthen, and for me you didn't. I mean, you got Arthur on loan from Juventus, could turn to be a good signing, but panic. Carvalho, I think, is young. The players you still have, I think Trent is looking more and more exposed now at right back. I think Robertson has not had the best start of the season and didn't look as good at the end of last. I think for me, there just seems to be a shift in change at Liverpool right now. For me, you've lost the players that for me made a difference when coming off the bench, like an Origi. And yeah, I just think it's a very poor window from Liverpool. I'd actually be worried as a Liverpool fan because you've had so many years, special moments, and looking like a top team that's going to keep challenging Man City and get to Champions League final, stuff like this and that. Maybe you'll turn it round and surprise me, but for me personally, I don't think this window's been nowhere near good enough for what Liverpool fans expect.
Yeah, I think it's all going to come down to hindsight. At the end of the day, we'll have to see what these players turn into. They're still young. Darwin Núñez only being 21, Carvalho being 19, Ramsey being basically a child. They're still young. So I'm hopeful that they can prove to be good signings.
It's possible, but you might have to deal with a couple of seasons of being back in that dreaded battle again before they come good, because
Yeah.
that's what happened when Salah and Mane came to Liverpool. They didn't exactly hit the ground running time. So
I mean, Salah did.
yeah, he did, yeah.
Salah scored 32 in his first season.
Yeah, that's true.
But we'll move on to the first of the Manchester clubs in Manchester City.
Yes. So I've given them an A minus for the thick window for Manchester City. Just below Arsenal's window. I think they got a lot of players off the books, which was very good for Man City, even though everyone is you still, because of financial fair play, you have to still sell those players and make that profit. And that's exactly what City did. They got Haaland for an absolute steal. And we don't need to go on about how good this kid is. They got Calvin Phillips, which is a very good player. He's still young. He's going to learn a lot under Pep Guardiola. It's going to be one of those where he's going to have to wait for his moments. He might have. He's going to be there in case Rodri gets injured. They obviously signed a Kanji on deadline day. Again, another backup. But that's all it really is at City. They're just bolstering their squad back up again because they got rid of players that have been there for years, like Jesus, Sterling, etc. Obviously, Fernandinho released after so many years of fantastic service for Man City. But for me, they just did what they needed to do. City, they just carried on the way they know how. Pep Guardiola always has a plan in place right before the window. He goes after the players he wants. He gets the players he wants. It's very rarely you don't get the players that they're after. And it's just roses at City for me.
I agree. I've given them an A, another, well, one of two A's on my list. I think the signing of Haaland is going to be a unreal signing. You know, whether he spends his entire career at City or he ends up moving on, he will absolutely demolish the goal scoring records in this country. We've seen Harry Kane in this league for a long time, and he's closing in on the record. I don't think it'll take Haaland as long to get close to that, to Shearer's record at all. Calvin Phillips, like you say, he's a good backup player. I think he was always going to cost a lot, but they wanted their man. They got their man. They didn't mess about. They got it done quick. Sergio Gomez, I can't really talk about, coming from Anderlecht, but he's back up at left back in case Cancelo gets injured. And Akanji, I think, was just a signing for deadline day because they were bored and they just wanted another player. But he was always a good player for Dortmund, and I think he'll prove better backup than what Nathan Ake does at City.
Oh yeah, like I say, he's just there for backup and to bolster the squad because obviously 2 cups, Champions League, these players need to play to give the big boys a rest. So that's what they're there for.
Yep. On to the last of the Manchester clubs. I'm being very, very harsh with Manchester United. I'm only going to give them a D. Now, with context, I think they've signed brilliantly, but I think the fees, like, they were always going to have to spend big. The United, every club is going to make them pay a premium just because of who they are. We've seen it when they went after Cody Gakpo. They didn't get him because PSV wanted 45 million, and Leeds were about to have a bid for 25 accepted. So they were always going to have to spend big. And I think in context of the fees that the players have been bought for, 50 million for Martinez, 60 million for Casemiro, and 81 for Anthony, that's far too much money for the players that they are. Casemiro is getting on. You're only going to have maybe 3 years of him at his top level, and that's a push. And 60 million is a lot of money. Martinez can, he's young. He can still prove to be worth that 47 million. I don't see his future at centre back still. I do think he's too short, but he can prove me wrong. He's been amazing so far. And Anthony, again, 81 million in my opinion is far too much. The kid's got talent, but that's ludicrous fees, and that's why they're only a D plus for me.
Okay. So I actually have the opposite. I actually have them as a B minus. And I will tell you for why. You've obviously said about the players that they brought in and the crazy money that they've had to spend. Now, for me, I agree the money they've had to spend is just ridiculous on some of the players, but that's just the football age we're living in now.
Yeah.
I mean, the money's just going to keep going up and up, unfortunately. It's just the way it is. You're going to have to take chances on big money signings. For me, the reason I've given them a B minus the most, though, is they're actually dealings out of the club. I think they've got rid of a lot of players that they needed to do so. They got rid of Pogba, they got rid of Mata, Cavani, Matic, Henderson, Pereira, Telles, Chong, just to name a few. These are all players that were just sat on the bench picking up a wage at Man United, and they were happy to do so. And it was just something Man United needed to get done. So I think in terms of the start of the transfer window, that's what they focused on. They looked at all the deadwood they needed. Ten Hag came in and was like, right, what do I need? What do I don't? And these players didn't make the cut. And he was like, right, well, if you don't make the cut. So they all went to pastures new, to different teams. You obviously had Lingard released, ends up at Forest. Pogba released, ends up back at Juve. What surprises me is it seems like a lot of players were released rather than actually sold. Yeah. So in terms of them bringing in money, they didn't bring in that much, a bit of money on that. But what they have done is they opened up their finances again in terms of wages, which is always a good thing. I mean, you saw it last year with Arsenal with Aubameyang. They released him on a free just so he could get his move to Barca. It's something you have to do as a club. So for me, that's why I've given them a B minus. I think their outgoings has been better than their ins, but I think their ins have been decent regardless of the money they've spent. They have bought well, but as you say, it remains to be seen how good are these players going to be for the money they've spent. But that's why I've given them a B minus.
I can say that. On to Newcastle.
Yeah, so this one for me is an interesting one. I think they've had a good win. B. I think before they signed Alexander Isak, I would have given it a C. I think it just puts them up a ranking on its own. I think this kid is very, very special. They needed a number 9 that's going to put the ball in the back of the net. And in terms of the players Newcastle could have attracted, this is probably the top tier one they could have done so. And not only that, but they got it done quick. They didn't let any other club come in and try and steal it last minute. They went in, got their man, job done. He's a Newcastle player. I think they literally got it done in 48 hours deal, which is bravo to Newcastle on that one. Newcastle fans will be very excited to see this guy in action when he eventually gets match fit and obviously gets in terms with the Premier League. I think Nick Pope, a fantastic signing. One of England's top goalkeepers, great signing for Newcastle. Botman, another good signing. They've recently just got Karius in on a free. Obviously, Liverpool fans will know about Karius. I think he's a good backup goalkeeper. Obviously has a mistake in him, as Liverpool fans well know.
Yep.
But for me, it was a good window for Newcastle. It was more in terms of the players they brought in rather than they got out. But for me, that's why I give them a B, a solid window for Newcastle.
Yeah, I agree. I've given them a little bit less of a rating. I've given them a C. I still think there's areas that you need to improve. I think they need to improve the midfield. While Joe Linton has been a revelation at centre mid, there are still question marks around that position. I think they need a little bit more strength and depth because if there is an injury to a Joe Linton, to a Bruno, they're going to be struggling.
I agree.
I think that they've signed well, but I think that there's still room for them to improve. So I've given them a C.
Okay.
Nottingham Forest, 23 signings. Right, where do we start?
Well, this is the thing. So for me, I've given them a C. Now, the reason I've given them a C, it was quite hard to judge their window because of how many signings they've done. I mean, 23 in and like 30 out. It's been a crazy window for Nottingham Forest, and whoever is dealing with that side of things must be absolutely exhausted. I'm so glad the window is now closed because they
Oh
must
yeah.
be knackered. But I'll start off with the signings I think are going to be good signings for Nottingham Forest. Jesse Lingard, I think, Nico Williams, Renan Lodi, Morgan Gibbs White. Those are the four standout players for me. Oh, and Emmanuel Dennis as well. I think he can be a very good player. Those are the five standout players for me. Oh, sorry, and Dean Henderson, great signing, absolutely fantastic signing. But for me, I've given them a C. And the reason why is even though they probably had the biggest transfer window in English bloody history, most likely. For me, it's just a case of it can be a bad thing signing too many players because now the manager has got about 50 players at his disposal in that club. If you take into account his reserve team as well. And how do you pick your best starting 11 out of that? That takes some doing. And for me, it seems like there's no plan in place. It seems like they've just gone after everyone and everything, and they're just going to keep trying different players out until it works and build from that. But the problem with that is that just leaves a lot of confusion in other players because you might decide one game that you want to play Jesse Lingard in the 10, it doesn't work. 10, he plays well, and just then is like, well, hold on, you've signed me, I'm on this massive wage, and now I'm playing, and you promised me game time. Do you know what I mean? We don't know what these contracts entail, but for me, it's just a bit more of a question mark about this transfer window, even though it's been a crazy one, and everyone's like, oh, well, Nottingham Forest to spend all this money and bought all these. That's not the case.
Yeah. I think because my uncle's a Nottingham Forest fan, and speaking to him last season, he did say that the reason that they got up on a miracle, and a lot of the players that they had in that club were loan signings from, other clubs, and I think
Mm-hmm.
these were signings that as excessive as they are, 30 out, 23 or 24, however many it is in, they were signings that were always going to have to be made. I think I've given them a B plus, for the simple fact is they have brought in quality. Serge Aurier on a free, subject to a visa. I think that's a signing that's just being completed. Renan Lodi is a brilliant fullback. Gibbs White, while expensive, can be a very good attacker midfielder. And Nico Williams, like you say, is another good one on top of like Dean Henderson. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
question marks around them. You've got a few coming from, you've got one coming from, not two coming from, not three coming from Germany, sorry, in Richards, Niakate, and Awunyi. I butchered that name, but.
And Mangala from Stuttgart.
And Mangala, sorry, then four coming from Germany. Um, it's going to be a lot of bedding in for a lot of these players, but I do think that they were signings that were always going to have to happen.
I think it's signings that had to happen, but the way I see it and the reason I'm lower rated than people probably expect is as a manager, you just don't have time to make this work. You need
Yeah.
to. He is now going to struggle big time picking his best 11, 14 players. For me, it spells danger. Personally, I think it's better to make 7, 8 signings that you need to strengthen rather than having 30 players that you don't know your best 11. Personally,
Yeah.
that's my opinion anyway.
The worry is as well as whether they go into, administration with the amount of wages and money coming out of the club. So that's a lot of money coming out with the likes of, the high hitters in your Lingard, your Aurier, your
But that
Niakates.
well, that's the thing. These big players, they have to play.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a waste of money.
Yeah.
And
Anyway,
that's the question mark that remains at Forest.
we'll move on. We'll try and wrap up this episode quick because it is dragging on a bit.
Yep.
Southampton. I've given them a B. I
I'll give
think
him a B minus.
I think the signing of Bella Kotchap and Bazunu are great signings. Lavia is going to prove to be quite a good one, and just because I want to say his name, Samuel Edozie is going to be a Fan Dabby Dozy signing from Manchester City.
Right.
I love the pun, and that Jewel Kaleta, I think will be a good centre back for them. Kind of replaces what they've lost with Bednarek.
Yeah, I agree. I've given him a B minus. I think they've made some very good signings. Window, it was as good as they probably could have hoped for. I think there's just a few question marks on some of their signings. I think it puts them in that ballpark of possibly challenging Europe, but I think they'll be happy with like a 10th place finish for me.
Yeah.
It's just all a case of how quick these players settle in. Obviously, we've seen Bella Kotchap, Lavia, Bazuna already playing. I think Maitland Niles is actually be a very good player for Southampton. I think it's a great signing for them.
Mm.
Um, but I think there's still question marks for me for Southampton, but a half decent winner nonetheless.
Yep. On to Spurs. I think the last of the, oh no, second last of the London clubs. I've given them a C plus.
Mm-hmm.
I think Romero on a permanent, great signing. Langley on loan, I think is a bit of a worry. Jed Spence is going to be a brilliant fullback for them. Basuma is going to be a good midfielder for them. And as much as it pains me to say, Richarlison is going to be a success. And I think they've got rid of players that they needed to. The Deadwood, the Lo Celso and Dombele, Regulon, the likes of them. They're all either out on loan or off the wage books, and it's good. It'll be good for Spurs.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've gone exactly the same. C plus. I think they've signed decent players. I think they've signed some good players, but for me, they haven't done enough for me as for Tottenham Hotspur. They've still got those big hitters in Kane and Son. They've obviously still got Højbjerg. For me, their biggest question mark, which I was surprised they didn't actually change. I know he's a big character, but for me, I think a new goalkeeper was needed at Tottenham if they were going to challenge higher up. I think Lloris, for me, has just got way too many mistakes in. So as if I was a Tottenham fan, a new goalkeeper, like for example, getting Nick Pope would have been great for Tottenham or a Dean Henderson. But as you say, Richarlison, fantastic signing. I rated him at Everton. I expected him to head to a bigger club. He did. But for me, just not enough from Tottenham in this window in terms of where I think to strengthen. But I still think they'll be a very good team.
Yeah. And your boys, West Ham. I'll let you start off the rating for this.
Yeah, so I've given the Mighty Hammers a B plus. I think it's been a half decent for West Ham fans. I think we got the players we needed in the positions we needed. Obviously, the one thing we said right from the get, we got that in Gianluca. Obviously, West Ham fans will know that he exactly hit the ground running, which is a bit of a worry. The biggest worry of it is he could turn out to be another Sebastian Haller. But we obviously managed to get Areola on a permanent, which is own. Nyafagard is going to be a fantastic signing for us when free. Just like Aston Villa, unfortunately, he got injured. But West Ham didn't rely on what we already had. We went out and also got Kera, a great signing, Cornet. And then right at the end of the window, we managed to get our man in Lucas Paqueta, which I think is the standout signing for us. In terms of the players we've lost, we obviously released a few players at the end of the year. So many years of fantastic service. Our Ukrainian beast in Yarmolenko, Yarmi, we've finally released him to let him head to Ukraine. For me, it was a half decent window for West Ham. I still think there was places we needed to strengthen, which we didn't. Right back and centre mid being two of them, but I'm half pleased. I still think they could have done more, but I'm still pleased. It was one of our most prosperous windows, considering in January we didn't spend a penny and we nearly cost us our season because of that. So I'm happy-ish.
very much the same, but I've given them a little bit harsh of a rating for the simple fact that they haven't strengthened them positions that you said they needed to. I've given them a C minus. I think the signings of Emerson, Paqueta, and Skamaka will prove very successful. Also, the likes of Karen and Cornet. But I do think that you've got you've got a worry in midfield because if you get an injury to the bigger man in midfield, Declan Rice, who you heavily rely on, your captain now, that'll be a big worry for you. And I don't think you can
100%.
rely on Sorsek to just
No,
hold down that midfield with the
I agree.
the depth that you've got. And I do think you need a better right back than Corfal.
So foul. Yeah.
Whether
100%.
Emerson plays right back, I think he has been playing right back for years.
No, he hasn't.
Oh, has he not? I don't
Nope.
get that then. I don't know why you've signed Cornet and him.
He's been playing left back and corner. He's been playing like left wing.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there's still areas to improve for West Ham, but I think you've improved where you've needed to. But there's question marks.
Definitely room for improvement.
And on to the last club in the window, Wolves.
Yes.
Interesting one. I've given them a D plus.
Okay.
I think the signing of Nathan Collins, Guedes, Nunes, their big number 9. Obviously, it's a shame that he's now out for a good chunk of the season with an ACL injury, but they didn't wait about. They went out and they got another backup, and shithousery will continue in this league as the main catalyst of it. Diego Costa is back in the league.
She is.
But yeah, I think they've signed well. I do think Sasa Kalajic will be a success when he comes back from injury. A big 6'7" frame in the box is never going to be a hard target to hit for the wingers. I think Matthias Nunes, they pipped us to him. I think he's going to be some player, and he's already looked like some player for them so far. I mean, he's going to be a very good player. And Giancarlo Guedes has always been a player that's been highly rated around Spain and before moving to the Premier League, and I think he's going to be a good success. He's a very direct attacking player. And, I think they've also got rid of, players that they needed to get rid of, whether it be a loan or a permanent. Dendonker's off the books, Willie Bolly's off the books, Patrick Trone's off the books, about time. Morgan Gibbs-White's got a big move. And then, you've got the likes of Fabio Silva and Conor Cody who were out on loan, getting first team football. And then you've released the likes of Roman Sayers, John Ruddy, and Markal, players that probably needed to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've given them a C. I think in terms of the players they brought in, I think the two standouts are Guedes and Nunes, two very highly sought after players. Wolves done very well to secure the signatures for them. Obviously, like you say, very bad that they signed a big striker in Kolasinac, ends up getting injured, and now they've ended up bringing in Diego Costa. But for me, in terms of their whole window, I couldn't give them anything higher than a C. I think they did get rid of the players that they needed to, like you say, but I just don't see enough for me at the minute. And obviously, with Kolasinac being injured, I don't think Diego Costa's really going to do much. I think they needed someone that they might be able to bring off the bench and cause a bit of trouble. We might get a few goals here and there for him, but I don't see it as anything to shout about if you're a Wolves fan. And yeah, I don't think it was a fantastic window for Wolves, but it wasn't a terrible one either. I'd give it like a mid-table window.
I guess it'll come down to hindsight whether Nunes and Guedes will kick them on for anything more than what Kalajic will do when he comes back.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
That wraps up our transfer special.
Yeah, that's going to do it, guys. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Remember, if you subscribe, really appreciate it. We do read any comments that are on the channel, and we appreciate all your support, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
We'll catch you guys later.